A big mistake that a lot of students make when they start learning jazz chords is learning chords as different grips, but not learning how to make music with them. Let me show you a process using just one very simple chord and how much you can do with that as a starting point. There are a lot of fun things to explore. Let's start very basic with a simple G7 chord. That's a nice chord to vamp on, and there are so many things that you can do with it. We also need a rhythm. For now, I'll use a 1-bar rhythm and just play that twice. That'll develop as well along the way. Notice that I'm not playing the chord as a bar chord like this. I'm using different fingers for each note, and you can do that in different ways. That really doesn't matter, whatever is easier in the context. Now you'll quickly see why that's a lot better, especially with the following two levels. And luckily, because this is a dominant chord, then you can also add a few blues tricks along the way, but we'll get to those. It's not about the notes that you play, it's about how you play them. I'm sure you've heard that before, and phrasing is also an important part for chords. So the first thing to add is not extensions or fills or more notes, it's some slides. Already here you can see how it's helpful not to play this as a bar chord. And let's upgrade the rhythm a bit by just moving one note in the second bar. But there's another very easy thing that you can do, and we're still not adding notes to the chord. A voicing like this G7 shell voicing has two layers built in, a bass or root note on the lower string set, and then of course the chord on the middle string set. Without changing the chord, you still have some options with how you play it. You can split the chord and of course slide into the split parts as well. You probably don't need more than this, but now it could be fun to start adding some more notes. And since this is a dominant chord, that's also going to give you some blues options to explore as well. With the G7 chord that you've been using until now, there are 3 notes. But like this, you're not using the 2 top strings, so adding notes from those 2 strings is an easy way to have more melodies to play. Let's start with the B string, and then I'll talk about why that set of notes works so well for blues. The basic chord is this, and then you can add the 5th D, the 13th E, or you can double the 7th F. Now there are 2 ways to use these notes. Just explore what melodies you can play. But don't get intimidated by making melodies with 3 notes. It's not as difficult as you might think. Just mess around until you find something that sounds good and work with that, make some variations. But you should also notice that these 3 notes are also what you hear in a basic boogie blues riff. And you can use that to tap into some riff ideas and maybe add a bit of chord response, like this. But let's add another trick that is a part of the blues sound as well. Most of these techniques work on any chord, but I think this one works the best on dominant chords. Now in a way, the last level gave you a jazz version of the boogie woogie riff. And you can lean into that by adding this way of playing the basic shell voicing, which includes a hammer-on as a passing note to the 3rd. And this works perfectly for adding a bit of blues phrasing to your jazz chords. I'm gonna give you 2 more techniques that will work well for blues and that you can use to add a bit of jazz flavor to your blues chords. But first, check this out. Now let's add a few more melody notes. I'm sure you realize that we also need to add the notes on the high E string as well, but we're keeping it practical, so for this G7, that's pretty easy. You have 2 notes, even if there are a few ways to play them. This might seem complicated, but it really isn't. So this is a G7 shell voicing, and then on the high E string you have a G, and you have the A. Now you can play them like this, where I'm barring the 3rd fret. But you can also choose to not bar anything and then do something like this. And of course this for the A. And both options will be practical in different situations. It really just depends on what you're playing before and after this chord. You also have to consider if you're also playing the notes on the B string. And the way that I actually find myself using these the most is the rootless version, so this. When you check out these chords, you should find a way that's easy for you to play and then just stick to that. And then if you run into a place where it doesn't sound good in some way, then you consider changing it. Most of the time, I'm really using the rootless version in phrases like this, which really use that split to make it more playable. You can also use the complete version, which I mostly use in chord melody situations. They're often kind of heavy and full for comping. That would sound something like this. But you can also use the notes that don't work with the chord at all because it's jazz.
We played it wrong. Yeah. Didn't get the melody right.
It's a lot of wrong notes.
So let's add some of those wrong notes. This is really easy. If you're moving from one melody note to another, you can add a leading note from above or below. To keep it easy to play, I'm going to show you this using the rootless voicings. So if I'm going from this E down to the D, like this, you can add a chromatic note in between those two notes. But you can also add a chromatic leading note below the last note, the D, and then you get this. And of course the same is true if I'm moving from A on the high E string down to the G. I can add this leading note. And adding a leading note to the third, you can create something like this. And with stuff like this, I'm not really concerned with what the chord with chromatic note is called because it resolves immediately. Let's add another blues trick. A huge part of the blues sound on guitar is using double stops, and you should consider using those in your comping as well. Again, this is something that will be the easiest to get to work on a dominant chord, but you can also get it to work on other chords. These are often best applied as fills, and there are two practical ways to use them. Start with the adjacent strings. And really what is happening here is, of course, that I'm really just using sort of random sets of two strings next to each other. So this, this, and this, and then combining that with some chords. The other strategy is pedal notes, and in this next example, I'm using the high G as a pedal note and then playing a riff or a fill under that. Now, this is probably too busy to really be considered comping, and it's probably more of a fill. Let's level up the chromatic tricks a bit. Just like you can add chromatic notes, you can also add complete chromatic chords, and the principle is completely the same. And I'm still just thinking this from the melody. Just instead of using a single note, I'm really adding a complete chord. So if I'm going from E to D, so the E flat leading note, if I'm moving from E down to D, becomes a complete A flat 7. So. And if you want a chromatic passing chord from below, then you get this. And another great one is the chromatic approach to the basic tritone of the G7. So just the F and the B, and that gives you... Putting these to use, you can play something like this. This next one will work for any chord. You can play a chord one note at a time, which is often referred to as arpeggiating. And that turns the chord into a melody. And since you're already playing the chord, then that's a really easy thing to do. Now, a great one to use is this rootless G7-13. And check out how great that sounds if you combine that with some passing chords, some double stops to create a cool riff like this one. This process of finding techniques to get sounds with a simple chord also works for soloing, and it's incredibly important that you also go through that with melodic material so that you learn to hear and understand the jazz melodies that sound so amazing. And that's what I cover in this video, which will give you 99% of what you need to know and also shows you how to put it to use. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.